Many of you will know who Richard Witts is. So he's currently a music lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. His most recent book was a study of the Velvet Underground, which came out in 2006. He's had numerous other publications on post-punk recordings and many other areas of music. He lived in Manchester between 1968 and 1985, and very importantly co-founded the Manchester Musicians Collective, was active in Rock Against Racism, and played in a local band, The Passage, which I was always a big fan of back in New Zealand. He was the music editor of the New Manchester Review and City Life, and with Margie Clark, he was Tony Wilson's replacement on Grounder TV's What's On, hypothetically the Fall's first manager, and introduced Michael Clark to Marky Smith. So he's a person who has many interesting things to say about them. I'm completely convinced. I just wanted to read just a slight passage from Renegade, which says something about the Manchester Musicians Collective, although it's rather enigmatic. This comes from the sort of cut-up sections which intersperse a few of the chapters. So I'm just going to read a couple of lines. The perfect hour, brought low, Rigsby pulled up, number 6. You would have loved it. Loads of birds for you to look at. Nice rider for you to drink from. Sun. I released him from the pains of normal working environment. He meets the world, impotent labour, and Elvis, head music with energy, the Manchester Music Collective, Arndale CCTV, Berry Market Saturday, busy, about the present and always will be.
I don't ever remember a rider at collective gigs, I must say. Birds, yes. Well, Earthlings, greetings. I'm going to examine 3 themes, moving in from the general to the particular. The city, the band, the Smith, or as the Smith, or indeed Heinrich Schenker, might prefer it, the background, the centre ground, the foreground. I want to set the mood for this in the manner that BBC 4 set the mood in its documentary contemplation of Manchester titled Factory, Manchester from Joy Division to Happy Mondays, first shown in September 2007. Actually, not in the manner of it, but the very film itself, starting as it started with its classic Coronation Street-like location shot of a chapel roof surrounded by smoking chimneys. I'd like to focus in particular on its sequence of urban landscapes. Now, is this going to work?
In a dark northern city in the late 70s, 5 dreamers built a record label, Factory. 3 classic bands, Joy Division, New Order and Happy Mondays, and Britain's first super club, the Hacienda. Led by local TV personality Tony Wilson, they created a unique collision between conceptual art and street music. This is the story of how Factory pioneered Britain's independent pop culture, imagined a new Manchester, and blew a shed-load of money. Manchester, the heart and soul of Factory Records. In the 60s and 70s, a crumbling remnant of the Industrial Revolution, where slums were demolished to make way for bad modern housing and misplaced shopping developments. A great immigrant city in decline.
Somehow the street lights didn't make things lighter, they made things darker. There was no sense that the canal was somewhere that was for living beside. It was rats and drunks and horror, little black seepages. So it had a kind of strange atmosphere that still seemed to be very much from its past, as if we would never escape its past.
If you worked in Manchester, everyone would work in Manchester, so in the day it would be heaving with people. And then at night, it was like rats escaping. It would just empty. And at night, the city would be a ghost town.
The dereliction of the city in the mid-70s, as my LA friend said to me recently, I visited in the 70s, so it was like fucking Detroit, and it was worse than Detroit.
But Manchester didn't have its own indigenous pop music like Detroit's Motown. And the British charts in the mid-70s looked and sounded like this.
Does anyone know the way? Did we hear someone say?
We just haven't got a clue what to do.
Does anyone know the way? There's got to be a way.
In the 70s, popular culture was like Mud, Tiger Feet and The Sweets and Gary Glitter. I don't always say his name on television anymore. And I just found it, to go from the Beatles and the Stones to Motown to that stuff was...
See that, can't you, with the lights on? Yeah, good. Right. Discounting the factory footage and the talking heads cutaways, that opening sequence comprised 20 shots of Manchester and mainly Salford. Now, I'm very grateful to the director of this documentary, Chris Rodley, for letting me quiz him on these shots, and to Jeff Senior of the Northwest Film Archive, which provided the BBC with them. Well, the scripted voiceover gives the impression that these shots represented urban reality in 1977, as indeed did Barney Sumner, Paul Morley and Tony Wilson, although they wouldn't have seen those sequences. We find that material from 4 films was used. In chronological order, The City Speaks from 1946, a monochrome promotional film commissioned by Manchester Corporation, which gives us, amongst other images, the aerial shot of the city centre. The Port of Manchester, another monochrome film from 1955. And The Changing Face of Salford, made in 1967, which gave us all of the shots of demolition and slum clearance, mostly and perhaps entirely in Ordsall. The 4th film is library material from 1978, held by the BBC. So a quarter of the film material, half of the film material you see is from 1967, a quarter is from 1956, a fifth from 1955, and just 10% from the 1970s. Now, it's frustrating that the Northwest Film Archive holds very little material of Manchester's urban appearance from the early post-war period. And if you happen to know of any, they would welcome a call from you. But Rodley, an excellent director, used very partial fragments of the already restricted material to hand in order to offer a morose, impressionistic reflection, bleached colour, presence of rain, grey smoke, squalor, so as to support the claims of Paul Morley from Stockport, Cheshire, Barney Sumner from Salford, but speaking there from Alderley Edge, and the late Tony Wilson of Wilmslow Road and Hyde. There's some irony then that many of the locations in the recent drama series Life on Mars are taken in South Manchester, which best represents the urban look of the 1970s, according to the drama's co-producer Claire Parker. Meanwhile, the archive's 3 promotional films were made not to emphasize the degeneration of the inner city, but their reconstruction. And what we saw were shots reclaimed from optimistic films that were already in the 1950s and 1960s, showing what was being cleared away and what had been cleared away.